Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I am a robot, an author, an editor, a situation simulator. I feel like there's something else that I'm missing. But anyway, today we are returning to how I know this is your first book. Or you're kind of a noob, okay? Like, there are signs. And in case you missed it, I did a video on this previously where I did a handful, like 7 or 8 different things that stand out to me when I'm reading something that lets me know this is a writer early on in their career or early on in their journey of learning the craft. And I've got another list of them. I've been editing more, I've been reading more, and I have more to tell you. So forgive me if some of them overlap. I think they are different, but I think some of them might overlap a little. And so let's just get started. Number 1, chapter breaks happen at a climactic moment to start the next chapter on suspense. So there's a common suggestion or critique or tip. That's the word I want. There's a common tip that says you want your reader to feel like they have to keep reading so that they finish the story at the end of the chapter. At the end of a chapter, your reader should be drawn to go, well, what happens next? Well, what happens next? And in reading some of the stuff that I've picked up recently, I noticed chapters that were ending at a climactic moment just so that the next chapter started kind of already in the tension. And it was every single chapter that kind of ended in a climactic moment, or almost every chapter that ended in a climactic moment. You don't want to do that. Like, when they say make your reader want to know what happens next, it's not because, your character is standing on the edge of a cliff about to fall off and then the chapter ends. Well, I have to find out what happens to them. No, you want to finish the story arc of that chapter, but make the reader want to know what happens to the characters in the long term. So what we're talking about when we say you want to make your reader want to know what happens next, we're talking about momentum of the overall story. We need to know what your character wants, what your character's quest is, what's pushing them, what kind of dangers lie ahead. But not in this immediate scene do we want the story to just cut short. I always felt like I was being emotional. This is another situation where I was feeling emotionally blue-balled or teased because the person was like, I'm not actually going to finish this scene. If you actually want a complete story, you have to just keep going. How about you satisfy me in this situation? What actually happens for me, and let me know what you think in the comments down below, when a chapter finishes early, like in the middle of a climactic moment, I feel like I'm being cheated and even manipulated in order to continue reading the story because the author doesn't feel confident in their ability to start a new chapter without making it a continuation of the previous chapter in a climactic scene. So what actually happens when you cut a climactic scene in half is, 1, you deflate the tension of that scene because you've just broken the tension. If I decide, I'm going to read 3 chapters at night and then put down the book, if I'm in the middle of a climactic scene, when I come back for the next chapter, all that tension is gone. Number 2, it does show like a weakness or a, what's the word that I want? Some lack of confidence in the author to be able to start the story and have the character moving in something new without it piggybacking on tension from a previous scene or previous climactic moment. So I would recommend against, in most cases, breaking a climactic scene just to start the next chapter in the middle of the climactic scene. But again, let me know what you think. Number 2, your MC is a total badass at everything. And this can fall into like Mary Sue, Gary Sue style moments where they pick up a bow and arrow and they're amazing at it. They play poker and they're amazing at it. They sing and they are amazing at it, even though they've never really sang before, but they're just great at it. Your character acts and they're great at it. Your character is an awesome liar. But, if they're the good guy, it's going to be called acting because your good guy can't be a bad guy. So it has to be considered a skill. Your character has never used a gun before, but they pick up a bazooka and their aim is just... It's kind of hard to miss with a bazooka, I feel. I digress. You just get in the general vicinity and then the explosion catches them. But If your character is a total badass at literally everything they do, you might want to take a look at that character again and give them some flaws, give them some things that they're not great at, and maybe even consider allowing them to fail at some of the things that you've put in the story, because it adds complication, it adds complexity, it adds struggle, and it can change the story in ways you never imagined. A lot of authors I've noticed are very afraid of letting their character fail at something, or they are so stuck on, this is the plot line that I've given these characters, and so they have to follow through and they can't go off the tracks. And that makes, one, they're good at everything they do because they can't fail because they have to get to the next plot point. But two, it makes it predictable because you know any struggle that that character goes up against, it's not going to mean anything because they're good at everything they do anyway. Number 3, your debut novel is well above market average word counts. Okay, so I've been reading quite a few. I think this is particularly in fantasy and sci-fi stories recently that are people's debut works or debut novels, but they are all well over 140,000 words, and these are debut novels. I think one of the novels was just about 160,000 words, and the second was, I think that one was around 140,000 words. These are debut works, and I see it there. You know, if we reach back to the Wraith and the Reckoning, that one is also well above average market word count for a YA, whatever it is. It was like almost 900 pages or something. And there's nothing wrong with having a really long story. One of my favorite novels, Carrie and Comfort, is a super long story. It's not Dan Simmons' first novel. And that's not to say that you can't write a first novel that's really, really long. But I've noticed that a lot of novice authors have a tendency to overwrite or don't know how to cut stuff out because it can be painful to cut stuff out that you really, really like. And it can be really hard to tell, especially without editors or critiquers, if you're not actively looking for somebody who will be serious with you on your writing and what needs to be in your story and what doesn't need to be in your story. And so their stories will end up being way longer than they need to be. And that can be a turnoff. And it can be one of the reasons why you're having a difficult time pitching your novel or finding success in your novel with agents. Is agents are more likely to, are more hesitant. Agents are more hesitant to accept really, really long novels as debut novels. You have to create a name for yourself and a trust before many agents will do that. Now, again, that's not to say that you can't find success with a debut novel and an agent or independently with super above average word counts. But this can be part of your demise or be a struggle for a lot of people because you're overwriting. Then it slows your work down, or agents won't take a chance because it's so long and so many new authors overwrite. So if your book is super, super long, maybe consider getting some serious critique people that will not soften the blows, not going to be dicks, but will be serious with you on what works in your story and what doesn't work in your story. Number 4, you have scenes that add nothing to the story. I've seen this so many times, and one of the constant comments that I make when I'm reading a story or when I'm critiquing a story is, how does this push the plot forward? Sometimes you'll have just like a family scene of everybody sitting around the table talking, or different scenes where there's technically some kind of training, but it really doesn't, it comes out of nowhere, and then what they learn in that scene isn't really used anywhere. And so every scene in a book should do one of two things, or really good scenes can do both. 1, it reveals character, or 2, it moves the story along. Ideally, you want to have both. But if you have scenes in your story that don't actually move the story along, personally, I'm always like, well, why is this here? What is this doing here? It's not doing anything for the story for me, and that will pull me out of a story. Number 5, vague descriptions on important details. I run into this a lot. So I was always really confused. I like to pretend that I wasn't, but I was always really confused when I was given my brain just stopped working. When I was given the critique to add more detail to whatever I was doing, like, this needs more detail, be more specific, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't have a good grasp when I was newer at figuring out what the important details were and what the unimportant details were. And so then often now, as I'm reading, I'll see like really good moments for really good references in the descriptions to let me know about a character or let me know about a surrounding, something that's really, really good. But there will be really vague descriptions for stuff that's actually important. Like maybe this guy is going to use a gun later, or and it just says, he's armed with a weapon. Or, somebody is super religious and the symbolism that they wear, like a cross necklace or a patch on their outfit, is just kind of referenced like that. And so it says their jacket has a patch and they wear a silver necklace. But then later on in the story, that necklace or that patch becomes important because the patch makes them belong to some specific organization, or the necklace is used in a device, and those details should be announced when the character is described. So number 6 is kind of the opposite of the previous, and it goes with my other statement. Number 6 is too much detail on insignificant things. So like I was saying before, when I was first given the advice that, I need to be more specific on certain things, the mentors that I had were never really specific on where I needed more specific detail, but they would say, be more specific. And so I got this idea that I needed to be specific on all of this mundane stuff. So, let's just describe the blades of grass, the colors of the wall, even though the walls aren't important, every piece of furniture in the living room. And I think most writers go through this when they go through not enough description, then too much description, and then pulling it back to no description again. I remember there was some, there's like a tale that says something about Bob sat in the room with the green couch. And so then they would go, well, is it important to know that the couch is green? And so you go, no, the couch, it's not important to know the couch is green. So Bob sat in the room on the couch. Well, is it important to know that he is on a couch? No. So Bob sat in the room. It's important to know that he's in the room. No, Bob sat. Well, is it important to know that he sat? No, Bob. And so, like, that's the I can't remember where it comes from, but that's kind of an example of going from over descriptive to not descriptive enough. And so a lot of people, when they're told be more descriptive, it kind of gets plugged in everywhere instead of finding those specific details that are actually important, like the necklace or the patch, and they add it to everything. So in my notes here, I have the joints of his hands. Well, we don't really need to know that he's stretching the joints of his hands. You can just say he stretched his hands, and it means the same thing. But the joints of his hands is much more specific. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to run into situations where you're going to want to specifically mean the joints of his hands. But in the situation, if you go, he stretched his hands, you don't need the joints of. Or, I know I've seen it a lot, and I used to do it. You go, the knob of the door, he grabbed the knob of the door. It's just the doorknob. He grabbed the doorknob, okay? And so, yeah, usually in these situations, you see it so often, they have, newbie authors have both, where they have vague descriptions of important things and too much description on things that don't matter. It's a lot of practice and trial and error to figure out where those areas are, but you can do it. Number 7 is so much internal monologue for emotional stoking instead of decisions. And I think this goes with something I said in my previous video, which I will link at the end of this in case you want to check the other tips out. But it's often, and I know I do it in my first draft sometimes, because I need to get momentum to move my character forward. But the momentum needed for me to get through a story and figure out what a scene needs in a first draft is way different than what a reader needs in order to push them through a scene. So what I'm talking about here is the character having just internal monologue and arguing with themselves or reasoning with themselves to an extreme amount. And then they never actually make a decision in the scene. So they're like, oh, I would like to hit that guy so hard, but I'm not going to do it because I'm a better person. And besides, blah, 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 blah. What if he called the cops on me because I hit him? And then, so I just can't do that. And, I don't even actually hate him. I actually kind of like him. And so then you go through these emotional roller coasters internally. And then you get back to the action of the scene where all of that emotional baggage in the internal monologue didn't actually change anything in the scene. And actually, if you took out the emotional monologue and had somebody act based on their feelings, you would have more action in the scene. But when you have the emotional monologue, then it stops you from losing control of your character and from having them maybe jump off the rails of your plot. And so I see it a lot with newbie authors that they just don't want to lose control of the character. They don't want to lose control of the plot. And so they'll internalize a lot of the emotions rather than having the character act. Number 8, little to no prefacing of subplots. Things come out of nowhere to drive the story where the author wants it to go, not where it would logically go. So with newbie authors, I see a lot of stuff So when it comes to this tip, it makes me think of Beachhead, and it also makes me think of Triple X Seamus. We read parts of Beachhead on here, and then I did do a critique of it in a previous video. And I did do a critique of Triple X Seamus in a previous video. And one of the things that both of those had in common was something extreme happened in the plot, but there was really no leading up to it. And so it felt like it came out of nowhere. And you can surprise people. That's one of the things, is everybody always wants to surprise the audience. They don't want them to see it coming, but it's actually cheap and can make your audience or your reader angry if there are no tips or no hints that this is where the story is going, and you just blindside them with something. Because readers want the opportunity to solve that mystery with the character. Readers want the opportunity to look at the end and go, oh my gosh, how did I not see that coming? Or, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. And then they turn back the book and they can find all of the hints that go, oh, this was set up all along. But a lot of time, I've noticed with newbie authors, is they'll just introduce a new thing, a new extreme, a new character, a new situation that just forces everything to go in a certain direction. Again, not because it's logical for the character or for the universe or for the decisions, but because this was the pre-decided direction for the story, and so this is the way that it has to go, and they're in complete control. That makes it less exciting. And actually, I trust the author less when they do this to me, because I'm like, you're not going to follow any kind of internal logic. You're not going to follow any character logic. You're just going to decide what you want on a whim, and I lose patience with stories like that. Number 9, multiple perspectives for the sole purpose of reading minds and going over the same scene from those different perspectives, because how else would you know what anybody feels? So I don't want to say that I don't have a problem necessarily with multiple perspectives. Again, I'm going to go back to Carrion Comfort, which has the greatest multi-perspective story that I have read so far. Please let me know what some of your favorite multi-perspective stories are in the comments down below. But it doesn't jump from head to head to rehash scenes to tell you feelings and internal monologues. However, I see this a lot with other stories where, you've got character's name at the top of the section, and it goes through the scene, and then it goes to the next character's perspective, and it either replays that scene or it flashbacks that scene just to let you know what that character was feeling or doing and how they felt about that scene by telling you. Because for some reason, the author doesn't have confidence in their ability to express how these other characters feel, or if the characters are good or bad. And sometimes, a lot of times, the author doesn't want you to think that this character is bad or evil or has any negative character traits because they're going along with it or because they don't say anything. So then they put you in their head so you could see their internal monologue of them fighting with whether or not they want to say anything. And then it's just cheap, and you're rehashing, and it's all telling. You can trust your readers a little more than that. If you leave the hints, your readers will pick up on what it is you're saying or trying to do, or who these different people are. In movies, we almost never get inside people's heads. And in movies, we often, if we are in somebody's head, it's only in one person's head because they're the ones telling the story. But we still get an idea of who all of these other characters are without getting in their heads. And you can do the same thing with a book. You don't have to tell the reader, oh, I just didn't want to do that because I was afraid for my life, or because I actually agreed with this guy over here. You don't have to get us in their heads for them to justify their actions. Just show us their actions and reveal their characters through what they do, what they say, and what others say about them. And then finally, number 10 is the use of cliched phrases. So I had a professor who best described this to me as cliched phrases are words that another author has already strung together. So I'm thinking, deer in a headlight, which I did use in my first novel. And that's when my mentor was like, this is a cliche. Find another way to say this. Is there another way to say this that is more like your voice and not someone else's voice? And that's the important thing about not using cliches. So a cliched phrase, if we think of it as how another author already put words together, then as soon as you use a cliche, we have been pulled out of your character and your authorial voice and into somebody else's. It totally breaks the narration, it breaks the personality, and it disrupts the storyline. The best thing you can do is take any cliched phrase and try to express it in a new way that hasn't been done before, hasn't been voiced by somebody else before. Now, this goes for narration. If you're talking about character dialogue, dialogue plays by a little bit of a different rule than narrative style or narration voice, because people do talk in cliches. So you can have somebody say, oh, you look like a deer in the headlights, if that falls into their character. But having the narration say, he looked like a deer in the headlights, we're starting to break it. Here are a couple more. All that glitters isn't gold. Don't get your knickers in a twist. All for one and one for all. Kiss and make up. He has his tail between his legs, and they all lived happily ever after. Cat got your tongue. Read between the lines. Someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you. As old as the hills, fit as a fiddle, without a care in the world, a diamond in the rough, brave as a lion, weak as a kitten, had nerves of steel, ugly as sin, ugly as a pig is also another one. Every cloud has a silver lining, don't cry over spilled milk, the calm before the storm, the perfect storm. Laughter is the best medicine, love you more than life itself. Scared out of my wits, frightened to death, all is fair in love and war. So it's not that you can't use these phrases, they can fit in dialogue, and characters can say them to one another. You do start sort of ending up in cliche characters if you use too many cliches as dialogue. Like, how many times can we have the bad guy go, what, cat got your tongue? Or how many times can we get the bully or the enemies to lovers, love interest go, what, cat got your tongue? Before we're like, or there was one that came up the other day with,
if I told you I'd have to kill you, and it looks like you've had enough trauma for one night.
I could tell you, but then I have to kill you.
I tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Well, if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Oh, that's original.
If I told you that, I'm afraid I'd have to kill you.
If I told you that, I'm afraid I'd have to kill you.
I'd like to see you try.
You see, my identity must remain mysterious and my mission secret. I cannot reveal it to you.
Why not?
Because I would then have to kill you.
Oh, I can't tell you that. Otherwise, I'd have to kill you.
Anyway, again, that's not to say you can't use cliched phrases. You are free to use cliched phrases, particularly in dialogue, but when you use them in narration or you overuse them or you use them on certain character types, you start to lose your voice and start to fall into someone else's writing, or you lose the uniqueness of your character. That's all I have for this video. And remember, none of these are steadfast rules. No writing rule is really a steadfast rule. There are suggestions, and there are ways to subvert expectations. There are ways to use probably most of these in a positive way, but it can be harder. And these are reoccurring things that I see happen with newbie authors. If you like this kind of content, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And let me know if there are any subjects you'd like me to cover in the comments down below. Until next time, do well and don't die.